everybody. Welcome back to the Lettermen Lounge. It's been a while since we've been here. I am Matt Parker, of course. You guys know who I am by now. I hope anyway. Joining me today and for all time moving forward, unless he doesn't want to be here anymore, is our new recruiting ace, Mick Walker. Mick, first off, welcome aboard to Lettermen Row. We're very happy to have you. Mick brings a plethora of experience, covered Purdue recruiting for a long time. He's an Ohio guy, and now is covering the big leagues of the Big Ten, I would say. So, Mick, welcome aboard, man. Happy to finally have you on the show.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate being on. We do need to clarify. I'm the state of Ohio guy. I'm not an Ohio guy as a Spencer and Matt Parker. I am not a Bobcat. I am not a not. I did not spend any time in Athens in college, so we can clarify that. I don't want to take a false honor or false credit there. But yeah, I'm excited to be on. Excited to talk about Ohio State recruiting because you and I already do that enough. We might as well get some views or get some help gain some subscribers from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the folks at home wondering about where Spencer Holbrook is, and I do apologize for any noise in the background. My apartment is getting some work done to it right now. But Spencer is behind the camera producing the show these days. But we love him and we miss him just the same being on the show. But that said, let's dive right into it. We are getting into the busiest month of the recruiting season, I think, with official visits taking place, unofficial visits taking place. Camp season is coming up. But before we get into all of that, Mick was down in Nashville for the On Three Elite Series, which is a 2-day seminar all geared towards NIL, ways to maximize athlete platforms and all of the likes like that. And there were, of course, multiple Ohio State targets in Nashville and a couple of Ohio State commits as well, with Tavian St. Clair, Devin Sanchez, and Naeem Offord representing Ohio State as the 2025 commits in Nashville. But Mick, I want to open the floor since you were down there. I want to talk about a couple of guys to just lead off the conversation. And for me, the biggest one, both physically and literally, is the 5-star plus offensive tackle David Sanders out of Charlotte, North Carolina, Providence Day School. The number one offensive tackle in the On Three industry rankings, top 5 overall prospect. This is a guy that, I mean, he's been to Ohio State twice now this spring, visited it in March for the Student Appreciation Day that was on March 30th. And then he made that bit of a splash surprise visit at the start of May, which I think, to me, that was the visit that really put Ohio State not quite in the driver's seat, but there's a fair argument that Ohio State is at least in the cockpit. And I don't know how many chairs are in the cockpit. Some would say 2, some would say 3. Depends on how big the bird is, I suppose. But that's my Tim May reference. There you go, talking about planes. But I think Ohio State has done a lot to really insert itself as a serious contender in this recruitment. And anyone that, doesn't necessarily cover Ohio State doesn't really think that. It's just like Ohio State's just kind of lingering. But I would argue Ohio State is they're in it. They are absolutely in it and need to be taken seriously. But what did you learn just talking to David and those around him when you were in Nashville?
Yeah, I've mentioned it multiple times in the Letterman Lounge, talking to people on the board. But David was far and away the most respectful, most honest kid that we got to talk to. I mean, he held shop with about 5 or so different team sites and handled it like a professional. So that was awesome. But when we get into David Sanders in Ohio State, I think you mentioned it earlier. I think people throughout most of spring didn't want to mention Ohio State and David Sanders because it didn't make a lot of logical sense. They were the only school in his top 6 that wasn't in the SEC or above the Mason-Dixon line. So there was some work they had to do, and he mentioned that in our interview with him, that he the visits to Ohio State, the relationship with Justin Fry, some of these things have really helped clarify and alleviate any concerns that he had about going 8 hours or 10 hours away from home. It also does help that his grandparents are up in Buffalo, New York, which is what he told me. And so Ohio State and Tennessee are the only 2 places so far that they've been able to visit. Read into that what you will, but those are the only 2 places his grandparents have been able to visit with him. They will be on all the official visits. So that's something to look forward to. But yeah, he spoke really highly of Justin Fry, which I know is a guy that gets talked about a lot in the Lettermen Lounge and amongst Ohio State fans. But he had a lot David Sanders had a lot of good things to say about him. David Sanders spoke really highly of Tavian St. Clair, who was down there spending all weekend with him. We have the picture of him that was up on the front page at one point this weekend. He also spoke highly of Carter Lowe, and David Sanders and I, we in the evening after the dinner, we actually did talk about how just Carter recruiting him and what it means, because Carter could be a left tackle. He could be a left tackle at Ohio State. He'd be a left tackle in a lot of classes, but knowing that he's still recruiting David and that they both could play left tackle, they're both tackles, meant a lot to him. And I think Ohio State is going into June with these official visits having as good a shot as anybody at David Sanders, and because a lot of the work that they did this spring with the coaching staff, the commits, and also Paris Johnson, the former offensive tackle, who has been in communication with David Sanders. The families are talking, and that's really helped them alleviate a lot of concerns because they have a clear plan of how they could play David Sanders and what they could do with him because of what they were able to do with Paris Johnson Jr.
Yeah, Paris Johnson Jr. has been a very pivotal guy in this recruitment, which is kind of funny to me, just in a sense. And there is, I remember the first time seeing David Sanders visit Ohio State was for the spring game in 2023, I think it was. And he's walking out of the tunnel with Paris Johnson Jr. and big old bear hug and stuff like that. And that image has just lasted in my mind for this entire time. And the plan that Ohio State is recruiting Sanders on is pretty much the same path that Paris Johnson was on.
Correct.
And so that's kind of how I feel about that. So Paris Johnson has already made his Ohio State official visit. David Sanders, his Ohio State official visit is June 21st through the 23rd. Tavian St. Clair is also making his official visit that weekend as well, as is Devin Sanchez and Naeem Offord. So that's a lot of stars. My math says that there's 20 stars right there in those four names. Other official visits for David Sanders include Clemson. He'll be in Clemson, South Carolina this weekend. He's going to Georgia. He's going to Tennessee. He's going to Alabama. And he's already made an official visit to South Carolina. That was for the Gamecock spring game. Moving right along the list of guys that you spoke to. And this is a guy that you've known for quite a while now, since his freshman year. This is Dorian Brew, the 5-star cornerback out of Conroe, Texas, who played at Clayton Northmont, which is just outside of Dayton in Ohio, and then transferred going into actually midway through his junior season, as a matter of fact.
Yep, a few games in.
Yeah. And, he was set to commit to Ohio State, quite honestly. It's not, the most guarded secret in the world that Ohio State was going to get his pledge on January 24th, I believe was the date, maybe the 23rd, somewhere in there. And then he backs off, kind of really reopens up his recruitment, kind of takes a lot of stock of things. And there hasn't been any decision yet, but he does have official visits about to kick off. There was an interesting note from On3 Steve Wiltfong while he was in Nashville about Dorian Brew, pretty much saying that right now it's trending as USC and Ohio State. And for the last, I don't know, however many months, probably 3 or 4, a one-time, potential Ohio State commit, essentially, and this is just me paraphrasing and putting it into my words. I don't mean it like this. Essentially didn't want anything to do with Ohio State, was listening to, USC, Texas, LSU, any program that's not in scarlet and gray. But now the tides have changed. And I think a big reason because of that is 4-star cornerback Blake Woodby decommitting. And you got a little bit of insight into just how important that decommitment was for Dorian Brew's recruitment as it relates to Ohio State.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, I've known Dorian. I was there. I happened to be there at Clayton Northmont the day he got his first offer from Kentucky. So we've been good ever since. Him and his mom, Donica, she's a great lady as well. She ran track at Ohio State Athletics Hall of Fame. So I know them pretty well, and it was good. You mentioned it when we talked, but I was able to talk to him, and during that conversation, I think because of our relationship and how long I've known him, he got pretty open and honest with me and pretty candid about. Because it'd be very easy for a guy in his position to say that Blake Woodby being committed or decommitting had no impact on him. It was all his own recruitment. He got pretty open about that it did. I think Devin Sanchez has reminded him, hey, that they have another spot. I think Matt Guerreri has reminded him that that they have a spot for him. Tim Walton has reminded him. And I think those two guys are real big because he also mentioned down in there that Ohio State's pitching him on the versatility. When I brought that question up, it was phrased as cornerback and safety. He threw in the nickel part there, which I know is what they pitched Blake Woodby on playing. So I don't know if they're trying to pitch Dorian Brew on corner or nickel or safety, but I know Matt Carrera and Tim Walton are both on him. Devin Sanchez, who he trains with down in the Houston area, is on him hard. Obviously, I think Tavian St. Clair, some of those other guys are on him, recruiting pretty well. And he's another guy, I believe, that will be there for that June 21st weekend as well. So you're kind of seeing the big collective of guys getting together. I think that's the final weekend of the summer for those official visits, and that's probably going to be the biggest one, and one where you're going to see a lot of fireworks coming out of it. Just either way, because the decisions will start being made. And Ohio State's getting the final say with a handful of guys. And that's one thing David Sanders, going back to him, that he did mention that he thinks it does have an impact that Ohio State's getting that final one. It's the last thing he'll think about. And so getting that final official visit with Dorian Brew, David Sanders, all of them will be good for Ohio State in the end, I'd imagine.
And to me, you go back and you look at the official visits last summer and what that last weekend was for Ohio State, specifically with defensive backs. And that was Aaron Scott Jr., Bryce West, and Miles Lockhart all made their official visits to Ohio State then. Now, this year, you have Devin Sanchez, Naeem Offord, Dorian Brew all making their official visits. Tim Walton, man, he's good. He's just good at what he does.
Very
and
good.
his new Twitter handle, OG Walt. Shout out to our friend Jeremy Birmingham for pushing that one. That's good stuff. Any other note though about Dorian Brew that really stuck out to you while you were in Nash Vegas, particularly the USC wrinkle? I think that was interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that's it's been pretty well documented. Like we said, his mom is an OSU alumni. She ran track at Ohio State. His dad is an LSU alumni. He ran track at LSU and then ran for the Olympic team. I think both of them would prefer that he went to their alma mater. He followed in their footsteps. And I don't know, maybe if USC emerges as a third school kind of out of there because of they're an intermediate, he doesn't have to go to either. He doesn't have to really tell either of them. He tells both of them no. He doesn't tell them yes, but he tells both of them no. Doug Bell is their DB coach, and I imagine he's a guy that worked at Houston, so I imagine he's helped USC a lot in that recruitment. But the USC thing is interesting. I don't know necessarily if his parents love the idea of him going all the way out to California, but they are a school that are in the mix, and ultimately it's going to be Dorian's decision. So they're obviously a factor that we're going to have to watch. I think USC and Ohio State are probably the two schools, like Steve mentioned, and Steve talked about it in that article, that seem to be gaining the most momentum heading into June. We'll see how that goes because he's going to take a handful of official visits.
Let's stay in state on a technicality. If you want to, some people view Dorian Brew still as an in-state prospect. In my heart of hearts, I still do, even though he's actually originally from Texas, moved to Dayton, and then moved back to Texas. That's something that people don't talk about.
And I talking to him off the record a little bit. I think he does miss Ohio a little bit. I think he enjoys being there. He was up there this past weekend was his birthday, and he was up there for that in Ohio for his birthday. So I think that's something to consider as well. I don't necessarily think he was in love with making the decision to move to Texas. I think it benefited him. It's going to benefit him long term, but I do think he misses Ohio. So that's another thing to maybe a feather in Ohio State's cap, a recruiting ploy, whatever you want to say. It's another thing to keep in mind.
So for all of the Ohio haters out there, and I'm talking about haters of the state of Ohio out there on social media, just take stock. Okay. Ohio, good place. Speaking of Ohio, moving along, 5-star Shaker Heights safety Trey McNutt was also in Nashville. This is a guy that both you and I have spoken to multiple times throughout his recruitment. Ohio State obviously is a big contender for Trey McNutt. And this is a recruitment that is like really interesting to me because I think if this was 5 years ago, Trey would already be in the class. Probably would have been committed to Ohio State pretty quickly, as a matter of fact. But we live in the now, not the then, and he's being very purposeful with his recruitment and how he is approaching his recruitment. I read a couple of things just from the last couple of days, and to me, I get the gut feeling that he's going to take his recruitment into his senior season. Whether that's because he really is just being thorough and wants to, leave no stone unturned, if it's because he genuinely just likes the recruiting process, But what's your read on the situation and the recruitment of Trey McNutt, as well as what you learned about where Ohio State stands once you left Nashville?
Yeah, and I'd love to be able to say I have a great read on Trey because I've gotten to know him since I saw him for the first time going into his sophomore year at a camp at Cincinnati, and that's when he had a handful of offers. We've known each other well. He's very conversational with me. We talk about a lot of things, but whenever it comes to real nitty gritty recruiting, whether it's on the record, off the record, Trey is always very close to the vest on it. The biggest thing that started coming out throughout this whole On Three Elite series with him being in Nashville was some of the official visit schedules for him, and he'll be at USC this weekend, Florida the following weekend, and then Oregon is the third one that he has scheduled. He would not give me the date on that one, but I know the Ducks are pushing for a lot of their top guys to be on campus that final weekend in June, so I wouldn't be surprised if he gets that. Then that leaves that what I would assume at least one weekend open. I'd assume it's that third weekend in June, right after the Florida visit, before the Oregon visit, for him to take an official visit. I think Ohio State, Georgia, Texas A&M are in play for that fourth official visit. I can't remember. It was Steve Wilfon or Chad Simmons. They were both in town and they both did it. They were both spoke to Trey and had great stuff coming out about him. But seems like the current pulse would be that Texas A&M gets a summer official and Georgia and Ohio State get fall officials. If you're Ohio State, I don't know if I think you'd probably want the summer to hopefully try and close it out. And especially since he's an in-state guy and can drive down, you'll take the unofficials in the fall because he can come down frequently. But I mean, I think Tim Walton, Matt Guerreri, Jim Knowles, all really this whole coaching staff, even Carlos Laughlin went up to the school to help visit him in Cleveland during the spring evaluation period. But they're all really pushing for him. I imagine they'll work as hard as they can to get him on campus for an official this summer and then take it in the fall if they have to. But again, he's another Ohio State legacy. He's somebody that Ohio State loves. He was around Tavian St. Clair and Devin Sanchez all day. I have multiple pictures of it. We posted them on social media. We have one of him with David Sanders, Tavian St. Clair, and Devin Sanchez. We have another one later where it's Niemer, Devin Sanchez, and Tavian St. Clair, and then Trey McNutt was in it as well, just to speak to how they were around. And Trey wanted to be in all those pictures. This was not a thing where I had to force him to get into it. He was happily with all those guys, wanted to be in those pictures. So he's around him. His mother was around Tavian St. Clair's mom and dad the whole weekend as well. So all the signs pointed Ohio State being in a good position. I think there's a lot of people that are trying to talk up Ohio State to him, but he won't give much away. Nobody I really talked to, whether it's Max Torres from our Oregon site, Scott Schrader from our USC site, nobody really got a true feel for him. And that's the tough part going into June. But Ohio State should have as good a shot as any. They're working every angle they can.
I want to circle back to your notion of, Ohio State maybe not getting the summer official visit and why you think that might not be the greatest thing. And I'm going to kind of argue against that in the sense of I think that kind of works out better for Ohio State because I think if this recruitment had to end today, Ohio State would not have Trey McNutt in the class.
That's fair.
And if Ohio State, gets an official visit in October, right? When Iowa is in Ohio State, is at Ohio State or something like that. Trey's been to campus on game day. He knows. I think he knows more about Ohio State than he does any other program, and I think by having the official visit, later in the season, later in the recruiting cycle, I think it's really just more or less the opportunity for Ohio State to showcase and, in a sense, show up every place else that he's visited. You look at the capacity for some of the stadiums that he will be visiting, in an official capacity this summer. Ohio State is 105,000. And I think there's only a couple more stadiums that Trey is a couple more schools that have stadiums that are bigger than Ohio Stadium in terms of capacity. Just Trey knows what Ohio State is. He knows what Ohio State is about. And I think by Ohio State, it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable position for Ohio State to be in. But the longer this recruitment goes on, I think it's the better for Ohio State. And something that's not really talked about, if a recruitment bleeds into a senior season, I think you kind of just have to pay attention to the in-state school because, guys graduating early, all of the emotions of leaving home and being away from mom and siblings and high school friends that, don't play sports, all of that. These are things that factor into a decision, the proximity to home and things like that. And I think Trey would be fine if, he wanted to go play ball in Eugene, Oregon for Dan Lanning, hang out with Puddles all day. Puddles is the duck, for those that don't know. I'm a big fan of Puddles. He's a cool mascot. My point in case here is, yeah, the idea of, getting a summer official visit would be great. Wrap it up, make things, signed, sealed, delivered. But I kind of think with just the way that this recruitment has trended, it might be a little bit better if this just bleeds into the season for Ohio State. And with as busy as a game day is for everybody on Ohio State's campus, if Trey McNutt, talks with Ryan Day, Matt Guerreri, Mark Pantoni, all the big brass at Ohio State and says, hey, look, I'll take an official visit, but I want to do it in the season. They're going to make sure that, they roll out the scarlet carpet for him, not the red carpet, but the scarlet carpet. So
there you go.
that's kind of my thought there. Before we transition into, talking about the official visits starting this weekend, who are just a couple more guys that left a lasting impression on you that are not making an official visit to Ohio State this weekend? Because little inside baseball here. We there are some guys that were in Nashville that are making an official visit this weekend, and that's how we're going to get into that.
There are 2 wide receivers. We'll flip that and talk about this here at the end to kind of transition into it, like you said. But other guys that were there, I think meeting Naeem Alford was awesome. He was one of the later guys to arrive on Tuesday to talk to the media. I put it on the board, but Chad Simmons and some of the Chad Simmons, Steve Wilfon, they all spoke with him and they got to talk to him. But he reiterated all of them that he was locked in. The photography guys, which is part of the check-in process, they take pictures with the hats. You'll see them all over social media. Naeem told him he was only going to take pictures with the Ohio State hat. They tried to set him up the Alabama, the Auburn, the Oregon, all these other hats. He told him no. I took a picture with 2 different kinds of Ohio State hats actually. So that was good to see him. Spoke to Isaiah Gibson, Jonah Williams, 2 great guys, 2 guys that are very much in contact with the Ohio State coaching staff. Jamie French, that was a big one that kind of came up there throughout the whole thing. I think he's trending away from Ohio State. That's been happening for him for quite a long time, or not quite a long time. It's been happening for maybe a couple months now, just from where he's at in his recruitment. I think he has different priorities than where Ohio State's at, and that's kind of caused a shift and a move away from each other. Other than that, I'm trying to rack my brain. I think that's about everybody. There was about 12 guys I spoke to. I think that was between commits and Ohio State targets. That was about as many as any other site had, just because of the guys that were there. So yeah, I think Trey was a good nugget to talk to him. And then the 2 guys later that we'll get into probably are the 2 most entertaining guys, 2 most interesting guys that we haven't talked about yet. Yep. But we'll get into those here in a second.
Well, that second is now. And the 2 guys that we kind of beating around the bush about are 5-star plus wide receiver Dakorien Moore and 4-star wide receiver Vernell Brown III. Those are 2 guys that Ohio State is very, very big on. Those 2 are big on Ohio State. They were both in Nashville for the On3 Elite Series, and they're pretty much taking flights from Nashville to Columbus, it sounds like, with official visits starting May 31st. That's a Friday. They will leave town June 2nd. That's the Sunday. And Brian Hartline is going to have his hands full this weekend with those 2, as well as 4-star Lucas Lovejoy wide receiver Dalen McCutcheon. So, Mick, I will before you get into it, I think my biggest takeaway, specifically looking at Dakorien Moore, is that there seems to be, and this is actually something that I was talking about with Spencer Holbrook earlier Thursday morning, just through a couple of text exchange. For some reason, it kind of seems like there's a lot of discounting Ohio State and discounting Brian Hartline. And to me, that is not a smart thing to do. Brian Hartline, what he has done on the recruiting trail since he has taken over that room is you'd be hard pressed to find someone that's recruited the position better than Brian Hartline. And he has, another big summer ahead of him with only 1 wide receiver in the class. That's 4-star wideout Des Jones, who is very talented in his own right. I think people really need to throw on the tape and give Des Jones a watch. He's very, very good. Ohio State's looking to add 3 more. Will Dakorien Moore, Vernell Brown, the third. This week I already mentioned that Dalen McCutcheon is making his official visit this weekend as well. So with you being in Nashville the last couple of days, start off with Dakorien Moore and just how realistic is of a contender is Ohio State actually in a race that includes Texas, Oregon, and Moore, who recent LSU decommit is making an official visit to LSU next weekend.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a shock to people there. Even Shea Dixon, who writes for our LSU site, was not kind of expecting that. I think some of the Texas reporters weren't expecting that. But yeah, speaking to Dakorien Moore, I think the biggest thing about Ohio State and that recruitment is there is not a very clear tie. And obviously, with LSU, there was a commitment there. Texas, that's the home state. And then Oregon, for those that don't know, Oregon recently hired running backs coach Rashad Samples, who is the son of head coach of Duncanville High School head coach Rashad Samples Sr., I believe. I believe it's a junior senior. And that means that Dakorien Moore's head coach is the father of an Oregon assistant. And those two, that's a clear connection to Oregon. Oregon's also recruiting his quarterback, Keelan Russell, who is a guy that obviously Ohio State has Tavian St. Clair, so Ohio State has not really shown any interest in, but he's a guy that's committed to SMU. Sorry to the SMU fans that tuned into the Lettermen Lounge podcast. I know you guys are going to be very upset with me.
I go myself.
Of that for that slip up, but I think that's another thing Oregon's pushing is the Duncanville connection with the quarterback, and that's why they have a pretty clear tie into what's everything that's going on there. Texas, they just put a first round wide receiver into the NFL with Xavier Worthy. They have a track record of offense with Steve Sarkisian. So those are the big things. But when it comes to Ohio State, I think it was really the most interesting I think he said was kind of the parts about dealing with some negative recruiting with Brian Hartline. I think that's a part that's gotten some discussion on the inside the Lettermen Lounge, the message board over at Lettermen Row, just talking about what you can negative recruit against Brian Hartline. I don't really know how you would. I think it's some things that you would just kind of say that are negative and hope that they would stick in a kid's head. And I think that's kind of what happened early in Dakorien Moore's recruitment. Now that it's come full circle, he's taken the two visits to Ohio State this spring. I think he's learned a lot more about Brian Hartline. Tavian St. Clair's been working hard on him. Devin Sanchez, who they played against each other in the 6A state championship game this past season in Texas. And even though they go against each other constantly, they're actually very close friends. And he mentioned that in our story with them that you guys can read while we're on the two subject. Matt has there is a deal going on that I believe is 2 months for $1 for Lettermen Row for using code. What's the code, Matt?
That's where the producer comes in, and hopefully he's not behind the scenes, I think it's there it is. OSU1, $1 for 2 months. That is for if you're watching this show, if you are listening to this show on whatever podcast platform you listen to, $1 for 2 months. That gets you all of camp. That gets you commitment season in July. That gets you all of the position weeks that Spencer Holbrook and Andy Backstrom write about. Running backs week is finishing up. I don't know what's next, but that'll be very fun to see what's next. But again, $1 for 2 months, code OSU1. The link will be in the YouTube description. So sign up. It's a good time. It's a good time to join.
With that, like we said, you can read the Dakorien Moore story we have at Lettermen Row coming up. That came out yesterday. And then on Friday, the day that he arrives in Columbus, we'll have a story out with Vernell Brown III, who is also in Nashville for the 2024 On3 Elite Series. And he talked up Ohio State a ton as well. I think the interesting thing with them is they are with Ohio State and Vernell Brown is that they are very much battling the in-state schools. And I think there's a pull for his family to perhaps stay in state. And unlike there's Jamie French and Vernell Brown gave two very similar thoughts when they were talking about their interest in Ohio State. Jamie French was very much, his family wasn't comfortable with Ohio State. And if they're not comfortable with Ohio State and him going that far, he didn't know if he'd be able to make a decision to go to Ohio State. With Vernell Brown, and you guys can read about this in the story that'll come out tomorrow or on Friday. He very much talked about the fact that his family is going to learn more about Ohio State when they go up there. They've only been up once. But they don't necessarily need to feel comfortable with him going to Ohio State. They just need to feel confident in him being able to succeed in Ohio State. And if that's the case, he will go there regardless of how much they want him to go to stay in the state of Florida. So I think that was a stark contrast. And he was an interesting guy to talk to. He was somebody that spoke really highly of Brian Hartline, like everybody does. And I think he's fully bought in on kind of the track record that Brian Hartline has, the development plan they have for him, playing with Tavian St. Clair, the South Florida Express pipeline, all those different things are kind of helping Vernell Brown's recruitment with Ohio State. And I'm excited to catch up with him after his official visit, because I want to learn more about how Vernell Brown II, his father, and some of the other members of their family thought about what they thought about Columbus.
And just a couple of notes there about Vernell Brown III. Ohio State was like the real hot team in the spring after 2 visits in like 3 weeks or something like that to Ohio State. I don't think Ohio State has cooled off. I just think the post-visit glow has weared off, and there's a difference there. I still think Ohio State, there's been a lot of buzz on the interwebs right now that there's, 2 schools in real contention, and there's just a lot of alluding to Florida, where Vernell Brown III is a Gators legacy. His father, Vernell Brown II, played for the University of Florida. And then additionally, Florida State is the other school that's getting a lot of buzz there. But man, like, you just can't discount the Buckeyes when it's in Ohio, when it's a wide receiver, especially from Florida. I mean, Brian Hartline fought, not literally, but Jeremiah Smith signed his letter of intent, is at Ohio State right now. So, that should be any reason why anyone's looking for optimism with Ohio State in any recruitment. I think it would just be because of that. But we're going to kind of pick up the pace a little bit here. Just talk about a couple of more guys that are making their official visit to Ohio State this weekend. A couple of offensive line targets I find interesting. One of them is a 4-star, Fort Worth, Texas, North Crowley High School interior offensive lineman, Henry Finucane. Steve Wiltfong placed an RPM pick on Finucane to pick the Buckeyes after his debut visit. I do like where Ohio State stands going into this official visit weekend for Finucane. Talked to a couple of people inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center over the last couple of weeks, just about offensive line recruitment in general. Ohio State feels good there. 3-star, Bradenton, Florida, IMG Academy interior offensive lineman Caden Strayhorn is making his official visit this weekend. That's a guy that we don't really talk about a whole lot, but the Ohio State and Strayhorn have a good relationship. Justin Fry has a good relationship with Strayhorn. He is a Michigan native. I do believe Michigan State, Michigan, and a couple of other Big Ten schools are going to be getting official visits for him. I don't think that recruitment is going to end up being a victory for Ohio State, but he also wasn't super high up on the board to begin with, is my understanding. So not the be all end all, but you can't win them all, I suppose. And then moving right. Oh, Bo Jackson. Almost forgot Bo Jackson. That's Mick's guy. 4-star running back out of Cleveland, Ohio, Villa Angela St. Joseph. Took an official visit to Georgia 2 weeks ago, where there's a lot of buzz and a lot of people saying that, don't be surprised if Bo Jackson commits to Georgia on his official visit, and that didn't happen. So I take that as a positive for Ohio State. What say you, Mick?
Yeah, I think obviously not committing anywhere is a positive following a visit, unless you're visiting Ohio State and you commit to them. Obviously, the Lettermen Lounge family and the community there would love it if you commit to Ohio State after every official visit. So do that for them if you're thinking about it for the Ohio State visitors out there. When it comes to Bo, I think the biggest thing that Georgia specifically was trying to push is that they're making him a priority. Josh Crawford, the running back coach, was at Villa Angela St. Joseph, I believe the first day, if not the first day of the spring evaluation period, or the first day that the Georgia staff was out. And that was a clear message that they sent to Bo and his family, and his father told me about that. So I think that's a common thing that people like to use against Ohio State when it comes to in-state recruits, is that we're prioritizing you more. We want you more. They're just treating you like this because you're an in-state recruit. I think it'll be interesting to see him get up to campus, get more time around Coach Laughlin, who has been on him for months now, whether it was at Ohio State or Oregon. They have a good relationship, and Carlos Laughlin mentioned it himself, but he's an elite relationship builder, and that's something that they're kind of pushing as he gets into this official visit. The other big in-state guy that we can get into before there's one more big name that Matt.
I have one last wrinkle about Bo Jackson there, and that is his relationship with head coach Ryan Day. I don't think he has a better relationship with any head coach in his recruitment than that of Ryan Day, and that merely stems from the fact that about 7 months ago, when it was, the camp of Marquise Davis or Bo Jackson. There's a lot of well-known information out there that Ryan Day was pushing for Bo Jackson. It's not that he wasn't pushing for Marquise Davis, the Kentucky commit out of Cleveland Heights. Marquise Davis is a very talented running back. Very, very talented running back, as a matter of fact. Mick and I have both seen him play, and he's very impressive. But I think with what Ohio State was looking for in this 2025 cycle, I think Bo Jackson was leading a little more towards what Ohio State, is wanting in a running back. And that's the guy that, like, alongside Jordan Davison, who, we'll talk about not in this show, but later on this summer. So that relationship with Ryan Day and Bo Jackson, that cannot be discounted. And I think that's a big reason why Ohio State is still sitting where it's at, especially since it was without a running backs coach for about a month. So, but go into, I do believe, if I picked your brain well enough, I think you're going to go start talking about Justin Hill. Are you not?
Yeah, we have two big James Laurinaitis guys left on the board, I believe, for official visitors. I'll talk about Justin Hill, and Matt will talk about a guy that he just put up a preview for his official visit for on the Lettermen, front page of Lettermen Row. So go be sure to check that out. Remember, 2 months, $1, OSU 1. You can get the link in the description down below, I believe is how it goes. But with Justin Hill, I wrote about it. One of the first articles I actually wrote at Lettermen Row. It's a couple weeks back now, but Ohio State made that visit towards the end of the spring evaluation period with 4 assistants: Jim Knowles, Larry Johnson, James Laurinaitis, Tim Walton. Tim Walton being the area recruiter, James Laurinaitis being kind of the position recruiter. They were pitching him on that jack position, and that's why you saw not only Jim Knowles show up there, but also Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson being there, being on that visit, was a big thing for him to be able to see what they have planned for him as an outside, as a rusher, as a pass rusher. And I think Matt can confirm this with him, but might be notable that there's not another. Is there any other edge or defensive lineman on campus this weekend? So that means there's a couple linebackers. There's at least 2 linebackers, and Eli Lee could show up. Who knows about that guy? But we love you, Eli. That was an unnecessary stray. But
come on now, first appearance on the show, and you're just tossing bodies, man. I mean, come on, Eli. You're very well loved over at Lettermen Row.
Yeah, but so you could have 3 linebackers and plus Justin Hill on campus. So that means James Laurinaitis will be very busy. Larry Johnson will also be very busy, but I imagine we'll be spending a lot of time with Justin Hill, who they're trying to pitch him on being that jack position that they haven't really used a ton. So you have to lay out a specific plan for Justin on how he's going to be used as a rusher, as a stand-up linebacker, and how he fits. So I think Ohio State would love to add Justin to that linebacker class with TJ Alford, Eli Lee, and then the 4th guy I think would be your guy, Riley Pettijohn out of McKinney, Texas.
Yeah, just one last note there about Justin Hill. I think it's very telling for our team guys, for Spencer Holbrook and Andy Backstrom, that James Laurinaitis is the lead recruiter for someone that is being recruited as the jack, because there's been a lot of questions about, who's going to coach that position at Ohio State. Is it Larry Johnson? Is it, at the time, was it Jim Knowles, the titled linebackers coach, I should say. Now that James Laurinaitis is like the legitimate linebackers coach, I think that's very telling on who would actually coach that position. But what he does coach, and what we know he coaches, because it's his title, are linebackers. And you mentioned TJ Alford. He will be on campus this weekend. I spoke with him. There's a story on lettermenrow.com right now about that, which TJ really opened up a lot about his recruitment and how it's really not much of a recruitment other than the fact that he's committed to Ohio State. So I would give that a read. But 4-star McKinney, Texas linebacker Riley Pettijohn is making his official visit to Ohio State this weekend. Pettijohn's the number 33 overall prospect and the number 2 or number 1 linebacker in the On3 industry rankings right now. I think Rivals just made him the number 1 linebacker in the 2025 cycle, so I can't remember if he's number 1 or number 2 overall in the industry rankings. But my point there is saying he's very good at the football. Plays at McKinney, Texas. And he is making his second visit to Ohio State in the spring, or, technically I think we're now going to be calling this the summer since it'll be June. Pettijohn visited Ohio State for the Student Appreciation Day on May 30th, and that to me was a pretty eye-opening experience for Pettijohn. He was there with his father Duke, who was a defensive lineman All-American at Syracuse. So he certainly knows his way in and out of college football and college recruitments and stuff like that. The message is still the same, even though the way it's delivered is maybe a little bit different. But the one thing about Ohio State that really stood out to the Pettijohn family is just how authentic and business-like Ohio State is. Obviously there's always a time and a place to screw around and have fun and stuff like that. But when it's time to go to work, that's what Ohio State does. Uh, you know, we've all seen it. Me, Spencer, and Andy and Mick. I don't know if you've ever been to an Ohio State practice, but uh, when it's time to go to work, like they work, man. There is a lot of business like things that Ohio State does when the lights come on, because the lights come on in the season, and that was exactly what Pettijohn saw when he visited Ohio State March 30th, that big visit weekend, and I think the biggest thing for me going into this visit is how much separation can Ohio State create between Texas and Pettijohn? Because right now there's about 3 RPMs on the Longhorns to land their in-state guy, Riley Pettijohn. It should be noted that Texas already has one in-state linebacker commit with Elijah Bo Barnes out of Dallas Skyline, which is a sweet name for a high school. Also, Skyline restaurants are incredible. Just a soft
Vince Young's high school, I believe. I'd have to double check. Vince Young's high school, maybe. Maybe I'm wrong. That might be
Yeah,
wrong.
we'd have to double check on that one. But so Texas already has one of the two for the Texas two-step right there, that combo. Uh, and a lot of people, again, are discrediting, however you want to call it, Ohio State in this recruitment. And I would caution against that just a little bit. I'm not saying that like Ohio State's going to win this recruitment by any means, but what I am saying is that Ohio State feels very comfortable where it sits in this recruitment right now. RPM, crystal ball, what any kind of prediction to the side. The staff inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center feels pretty good about where it sits right now going into this official visit. There are a couple of other official visits that Pettijohn is making. I do believe he's going to USC next weekend, and then he goes to Texas A&M the 14th through 16th, and his last official visit is with Texas, so he will be in Austin the weekend of the 21st. But to me right now, this kind of feels like a two-team race, and it feels like Texas or Ohio State. We'll see what happens after this weekend. Again, be sure official visits are starting. So be sure to once again sign up for 2 months of access for only $1. That's 100 pennies. That's flip over the couch cushions. $1 for 2 months with code OSU1. The link will be in the description on all streaming platforms. I think that's going to do it for myself and Mick Walker. Thank you very much for watching the new. I'm not going to say improved because that's a shot at Spencer, and Spencer's behind the camera, so like he could shave my beard if he really wanted to on the editing process here. But for Mick, I am Matt Parker. This has been the latest episode of the Lettermen Lounge. Please sure to leave a like, a comment, subscribe, share anything to get the word out that we are back in the saddle. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.